there's going to be even more pressure on the government to actually do something, which they've been reluctant to do. It's interesting that 3 states did temporarily suspend their state excise tax: Connecticut, Maryland, and Georgia, but we had 47 states that did not do it. So they're all looking at these state taxes as a means to support their budgets.
Andrew, we do know President Biden signed that executive order back in March, I believe, banning the import of Russian oil, liquefied natural gas, and coal to the United States. How are the oil and gas sanctions imposed on Russia impacting our prices here in the U.S.?
Well, we should look at this in context with what the world is doing. Not only has the U.S. banned Russian oil imports, but the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, and Germany and Poland plan to do the same by the end of the year. So as these countries and refiners shy away from purchasing Russian oil, they have to look for alternative supplies. And those alternative supplies are not easy to come by because you simply need to get more oil out of the ground. One thing that we have seen the government as well as the International Energy Agency members do is release these strategic petroleum reserves, which buys us some time, but does little as far as getting more energy out of the ground.
And I did want to ask, what about producing energy here stateside? What is the Biden administration doing to try and produce energy here at home?
Well, my opinion is they've done very little. We saw President Biden run on a platform of really eliminating fossil fuels. We've had a number of issues regarding drilling permits. Lately, the Biden administration did offer some drilling permits for sale onshore, but the acreage was about 1/5 what the industry wanted. Meanwhile, there's been a lot of press about the Biden administration not allowing the Keystone pipeline permit, which would enable next year for Canadian producers to supply more oil to the market. Even on the renewable fuel side, where we've had legislation in place, the administration has been slow to finalize those volumes, not only for this year, but for last year as well. That's frustrated not only the oil industry, but the renewable fuels groups as well.
Yeah, definitely a tricky situation, especially with Keystone and drilling. You know, nobody really wants this in their backyard. Is that right?
That's correct. When I look around and we see President Biden asking OPEC Plus to utilize some of their spare production capacity, or asking Canada what can they do to increase exports to the United States, you know, it looks like we're asking others to do the hard work of getting oil out of the ground rather than doing it here.
All right, Andrew, any final thoughts on gas prices? I know we covered a lot today, but again, you know, another record high of $4.47 for a gallon of unleaded gas. Just any final thoughts on what we can expect to see, not only over the summer, but really throughout the rest of the year when it comes to gas prices?
Well, unfortunately, I really do not have good news for the consumer, because absent really a regime change in Russia, we're likely to see these higher energy prices persist through the rest of the year and into 2023 as the world tries to come up with alternative supplies to Russian energy. It's not only on the oil side, it's on natural gas, where Russia has cut off supplies to a number of countries in Europe. And interestingly, Russia cut off electricity exports to Finland. So you can see that the world is looking for more energy, and to come up with that energy, especially in the near term, means higher prices.
All right, Andrew Lepau, our oil and industry gas expert, live with us today. Of course, always a pleasure to have you on the show. We always appreciate your valuable insight. And as we continue to see those gas prices rise, we, of course, will continue to check in with you. So big thanks for that insight.
Thanks again for having me, Mackenzie. I appreciate it.
Of course. All right, everybody. And speaking of President.
Okay, that was a great conversation there. I can't really believe the national average for a gallon of gas today, $4.52. Have not seen that before. Right now, I just want to give you one last update. Live now look at the Capitol. We got one more race called for one of these other primary states well, close to our time zone, in Idaho. Brad Little is winning the Republican nomination for governor in the primary election there. Of course, he is the current governor right now. He held off a challenge by his own lieutenant governor, Janice McEachin. She was endorsed by former President Trump. It was the first time a sitting governor has been challenged by a lieutenant governor of the same party since 1938. Little and McEachin clashed often during their term, generally due to differences over how they were handling the COVID-19 pandemic. So that is the news out of Idaho. That was one of the other major races that we were watching. Another candidate who was endorsed by former President Trump losing tonight to the incumbent. Right now, we want to move on to some of the other stories we've already shown you throughout the day. It has been a very busy Tuesday. We're going to start off with, into these overnight hours, President Biden's remarks as he made his visit to Buffalo, New York today, meeting with victims' families who lost loved ones. 10 people killed over the weekend in a senseless mass shooting that so many of us have unfortunately now grown accustomed to nationwide. And then we're going to hear from the mayor of Buffalo with an update on the police investigation and so much more as we go into these overnight hours. And we want to thank you for watching us live, raw, and unfiltered. That's what we do here on Live Now from Fox. A couple things to watch out for tomorrow. Remember, the Pennsylvania Senate GOP primary, too close to call. Will this trigger an automatic recount there between David McCormick and Dr. Oz? That remains to be seen, but we'll keep an eye on that race going into the early morning hours of tomorrow. So back out to President Biden as he comforted and mourned with the community of Buffalo, New York today.
Jill would like to say a few words.
I just wanted to say thank you to the families for opening up your hearts to us and for letting us be with you today. So God bless you, and thank you for allowing us to be with you. Yeah.
Majority Leader Schumer and Senator Gillibrand and Congressman Higgins. And Gov, thank you for taking my call when I called. And I'll never forget what she said. I said, I'd like to maybe come up if it's okay. She said, this is a big Scranton. Come. And I think you're doing a heck of a job. Thank you. Thank you for your heart as well as your head. And Mayor Brown, you've been wonderful. Thank you. And I know this is a lot of, when a vice presidential or a presidential chip shows up, there's all kinds of paraphernalia and people, and I know it's not easy. I want to thank your law enforcement officers for not just what they did in this crisis, but for accommodating us, and all the elected officials and law enforcement officers, first responders, and faith leaders that are here today. Jill and I have come to stand with you, and to the families, we've come to grieve with you. It's not the same, but we know a little bit what it's like to lose a piece of your soul. When you lose a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife, a mother, a father. The feeling of having that, as I said to some of you when we talked privately, you feel like there's a black hole in your chest you're being sucked into, and you're suffocating, unable to breathe. That's what it felt like, at least to us, and I'm sure some version of that feels that way to you. The anger, the pain, the depth of a loss that's so profound. You know, we know it's hard to believe, and you're probably not going to believe it, but I can tell you now, from our personal experience and many others who we've met, the day's going to come, it will come, when your loved one brings a smile as you remember him or her. As you remember her, it's going to bring a smile to your lip before it brings a tear to your eye. It takes a while for that to happen. It takes a while. Might take more than a season. But our prayer for you is that that time comes sooner or later, but I promise you it will come. As a nation, I say to the families, we remember them. We've been reading about them. We visited the memorial where they show the love for them, and you've all shown by the supermarket. And Celestine Cheney, 65 years old, brain cancer survivor, churchgoer, bingo player, went to buy strawberries to make her favorite shortcake. A loving mother and a grandmother. Roberta Drury, 32, beloved daughter and sister, moved back home to help take care of her brother after his bone marrow transplant. She went to buy groceries for dinner, the center of attention who made everyone in the room laugh and smile when she walked in. Andre McNeil, 53, worked at a restaurant, went to buy his 3-year-old son a birthday cake. His son's selling a birthday. Ask him, where's Daddy? Catherine Massey, 72, a writer and an advocate, who dressed up in costumes at schools and cut the grass in the park and helped in local elections, the glue of the family and the community. Marcus Morrison, 52, school bus aide, went to buy snacks for a weekly movie night with the family, survived by his wife and 3 children and a stepdaughter, the center of their world. Hayward Patterson, 67, father, church deacon, fed the homeless at the soup kitchen, gave rides at the grocery store to neighbors who needed help, putting food in the trunk of others when he took his final breath. Aaron Salter, 55, retired Buffalo police officer for 3 decades. 3 decades. Loved electric cars, hero who gave his life to save others on a Saturday afternoon. And had that man not been wearing that vest that he purchased, bulletproof vest, a lot of lives would have been saved. A beloved father and husband. Geraldine Talley, 62, expert banker and known for her warm, gentle personality, a friend to everybody, devoted mother and grandmother. Ruth Whitfield, 88, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, sang in the church choir, a caretaker of her husband, bringing him clean clothes, cutting his hair, holding his hand every day she visited him in the nursing home. Heart as big as her head. Pearl Young, 77, a mother, grandmother, missionary of God, public school teacher, who also ran the local food pantry. Loved singing, dancing, and her family. And all 3 are injured. Zaire Goodman, 20, shot in the neck, but fighting through it. Jennifer Warrington, 50, Christopher Braden, 55, both treated with injuries on a long road to recovery. Individual lives of love, service, and community that speaks to the bigger story of who we are as Americans. A great nation, because we're good people. Jill and I bring you this message from deep in our nation's soul. In America, evil will not win, I promise you. Hate will not prevail, and white supremacy will not have the last word. For the evil did come to Buffalo. It's come to all too many places. Manifesting gunmen who massacred innocent people in the name of hateful and perverse ideology, rooted in fear and racism. It's taken so much. 10 lives cut short in a grocery store. 3 other wounded by a hate-filled individual who had driven 200 miles from Binghamton in that range to carry out a murderous, racist rampage that he would live stream to the world. What happened here is simple and straightforward. Terrorism. Terrorism. Domestic terrorism. Violence inflicted in the service of hate and the vicious thirst for power that defines one group of people being inherently inferior to any other group. A hate that through the media and politics, the internet, has radicalized, angry, alienated, lost, and isolated individuals into falsely believing that they will be replaced, that's the word, replaced, by the other, by people who don't look like them, and who are therefore, in a perverse ideology that they possess, and being fed lesser beings. I and all of you reject the lie. I call on all Americans to reject the lie. And I condemn those who spread the lie for power, political gain, and for profit. That's what it is. We've now seen too many times the deadly and destructive violence this ideology unleashes. We heard the chants, "You will not replace us," in Charlottesville, Virginia. I wasn't going to run, as the senator knows, again for president. But when I saw those people coming out of the woods of the fields in Virginia, in Charlottesville, carrying torches, shouting, "You will not replace us," accompanied by white supremacists and carrying Nazi banners, that's when I said, no. No. And I, honest to God, those who know me, Chuck, you know, I wasn't going to run for certain. But I was going to be darned if I was going to let anyway. I'll get going. Look, we've seen the mass shootings in Charleston, South Carolina, El Paso, Texas, and Pittsburgh, last year in Atlanta, this week in Dallas, Texas, and now in Buffalo, New York. White supremacy is a poison. It's a poison running through, it really is, running through our body politic. And it's been allowed to fester and grow right in front of our eyes. No more. I mean, no more. We need to say as clearly and forcefully as we can that the ideology of white supremacy has no place in America. None. And look, failure for us to not say that, failure in saying that, is going to be complicity. Silence is complicity. It's complicity. We cannot remain silent. Our nation's strength has always come from the idea. It's going to sound corny, but think about it. What's the idea of our nation? That we're all children of God. All life, liberty, our universal goods, gifts of God. We didn't get it from a government. We got it from because we exist. We're called upon to defend them. The venom of the haters and their weapons of war, the violence and the words and deeds that stalk our streets, our stores, our schools. This venom, this violence cannot be the story of our time. We cannot allow that to happen. Look, I'm not naive. I know tragedy will come again. It cannot be forever overcome. It cannot be fully understood either. But there are certain things we can do. We can keep assault weapons off our streets. We've done it before. I did it when we passed the crime bill last time, and violence went down, shootings went down. You can't prevent people from being radicalized to violence, but we can address the relentless exploitation of the internet to recruit and mobilize terrorism. We just need to have the courage to do that, to stand up. Look, the American experiment in democracy is in a danger like it hasn't been in my lifetime. It's in danger this hour. Hate and fear are being given too much oxygen by those who pretend to love America, but who don't understand America. To confront the ideology of hate requires caring about all people, not making distinctions. Reverend, the scripture is seeing that we're all part of the divine. Love thy neighbor as thyself. That's the America I know, that Jill knows. And most deserve the most, look, we're the most multiracial, most dynamic nation in the history of the world. Now's the time. for the people of all races, from every background, to speak up as a majority in America and reject white supremacy. These actions we've seen in these hate-filled attacks represent the views of a hate-filled minority. We can't allow them to distort America, the real America. We can't allow them to destroy the soul of the nation. As President of the United States, I travel the world all the time. And other nations ask me, heads of state in other countries ask me, what's going on? What in God's name happened on January 6th? What happened in Buffalo? What happened? They ask. We have to refuse to live in a country where black people going about a weekly grocery shopping can be gunned down by weapons of war deployed in a racist cause. We have to refuse to live in a country where fear and lies are packaged for power and for profit. We must all enlist in this great cause of America. This is work that requires all of us, presidents, politicians, commentators, citizens. None of us can stay in the sidelines. We have to resolve that here in Buffalo, that from the tragedy, this tragedy will come hope and light and life. It has to. And that on our watch, the sacred cause of America will never bow, never break, never bend. And the American we love, the one we love, will endure. So to the families, from your pain, may we find purpose to live life worthy of the loved ones you lost. From a hymn based on the 91st Psalm that's sung in my church, may he raise you up on eagle's wings and bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of his hand. That's my wish for us. We can do this if we resolve to do it. If we take on the haters and those who don't even care, it's just about profit and politics. May the soul of the fallen rest in peace and rise in glory. And may God guide the United States of America, now and always. To the families, as my grandpop used to say when I walked out of his home in Scranton, he'd say, Joey, spread the faith. And my grandma would yell, no, Joey. He'd say, keep the faith. And my grandma would say, no, Joey, spread the faith. We're thinking of you. Hold on to each other tightly. Stick together. You'll get through this, and we'll make Buffalo and the United States a better place to live than it is today.
Had a chance to be with President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden. They visited Buffalo to meet with the families of the victims of this terrible attack on the Buffalo community that shot 13 people and killed 10. The president was very compassionate. President spent an extended amount of time with the families, which was very good to see, really giving families one-on-one time to be able to talk to him and the First Lady.
What were some of the things the family members said to the president?
The president and First Lady met with the families one-on-one, so it was just the president, First Lady, and the families. Those of us that traveled with the president were not in those individual meetings with families.
Did you get a chance to speak with them? What's the schedule?
Talking to the CEO of TOPS, John Persons, they would like to open the store as quickly as possible. They understand the importance of the store to the community. Right now, there is still an investigation going on inside of the store. As soon as that is concluded, TOPS will then begin to do the work that they have to do to reopen. In the meantime, they will be providing assistance in getting customers that don't have access to vehicles to other TOPS supermarkets in their network, recognizing that people really rely on this store for their groceries and also to fill their prescriptions.
The medical examiner, when do you expect that the process of releasing the bodies to the families and funerals to start taking place?
I think that process is probably going to start to move more quickly. It is my understanding that the first of the funerals is going to be this Saturday, so that process is moving. I don't have the name right now as we speak.
Can you describe what it was like over at the memorial with the president and other politicians? Was it a very somber moment?
It was a somber moment. It was an emotional moment. We added flowers to the already significant outpouring of support. The number of flowers, candles, and other items that were there show the tremendous impact that this horrible act has had on the community. Saw a real resolve in the president to make a difference, to try to bring to an end mass shootings in this country. They happen horribly for different reasons. This one motivated by racial hatred, but over the last several years there have been hundreds of mass shootings in the United States and America, Buffalo being one of the most recent and one of the most deadly.
Mayor, what did you and the president speak? How was that conversation?
Had the opportunity to speak to the president a number of times during his visit on the tarmac, at the memorial site here outside of TOPS, and at the Delavan Grider Community Center. The president certainly talked about gun control. He talked about his concern for the families here. There was talk about what could be done to end these mass shootings. The president seemed very moved by what he saw here in this community, and I really felt a strong sense of resolve and commitment in the president to try to bring change as it relates to these kinds of situations.
And we talked to some people who said, tragedies like this happen, and then politicians come here and they save your life, but then nothing ever changes. Nothing ever changes. What's your feeling about that? And you kind of just touched on this.
As it relates to gun control in this country, change has been very elusive. There are those in Washington who have put the needs and the desires of the gun manufacturers ahead of the lives of Americans. That has to stop. And I think the president will not forget. I think he was moved by what he saw. I think he has a sense of resolve. Many of us, some of us that were able to travel with the president, live in this zip code. Every day I wake up, I leave this zip code to go to Buffalo City Hall and other parts of this community. Every night that I come back home to lay my head down on the pillow, I come back to this zip code. So I will never forget. I can't forget. This is my community. This is where I come every day, and this is why I work so hard to make a difference. So I won't forget, and I won't let others forget what happened here in Buffalo, New York, what happened to my friends, what happened to my neighbors, what happened to my community.
Mr. Mayor, the more we learn about the alleged shooter and the planning and the months that he spent becoming radicalized and consuming all this, what the president today called poison, what's your reaction to that? I mean, it just seems like we keep learning more and more about this individual.
The radicalization of this individual, the level of hatred in the heart and head of this individual is stunning. It's staggering to know that that kind of hate, that kind of evil, that kind of premeditated evil exists in our nation, exists in the state of New York. I think much more has to be done about social media and hate speech on social media, hate speech that comes out over our airwaves. The president touched on that. The president spoke about that, and I am hopeful that more will be done to prevent the proliferation of hate on social media.
Mayor, I know that President Biden has had the chance to speak directly with you, but what did you make of his comments to the people of the United States and to the people of the community of Buffalo, and just what he had to say today at the Delvin Grider Community Center?
Well, the president said a lot of things. He talked about the fallacy of replacement theory, how nonsensical that is. He called it out. He called out white supremacy and talked about the evil of that. He certainly talked about guns and something being done about assault weapons and assault weapons falling into the wrong hands in our country. And those messages to the American people are critically important. I think the president's resolve, I saw him steel himself during this visit to get something done. I felt it. I think it's powerful, and I think it's real. But what was even more powerful to me in this time and in this moment was the moments that the president spent with the families of the victims of this racially motivated, heinous attack on this community. And the president didn't hurry through those meetings, didn't rush through the people that were hurting and in pain, and spent a lot of time individually with families, which I think shows his compassion and his commitment to change.
Have you got an opportunity to talk to the officers who are some of the first responders and stuff? How are they doing? What has your message been to them?
I have spoken to some of the police officers and firefighters who are first responders to the scene. I thank them for their bravery. I thank them for their heroic actions, for running into this danger as others had to hide and had to run for their lives. If not for the swift response of the Buffalo Police Department, more lives would have been lost on that Saturday afternoon. If not for the heroic actions of security officer and retired Buffalo police officer Aaron Salter engaging the shooter and exchanging gunfire with the shooter that ultimately took his life, more people would probably have gotten killed inside the store. So our police officers, our firefighters that responded to the scene are heroes. It was a horrific scene. the damage done with the assault weapons, taking 10 lives, was like a war zone. And certainly as human beings, I'm sure that has an impact on our police officers and our firefighters. We've encouraged our police and our firefighters who have responded to seek counseling if they need it, to not feel like there's any weakness or anything wrong in talking to somebody about the pain that they feel, because they feel pain, they feel anger, and they feel hurt as well.
Anyone else? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Good morning. I really appreciate you coming on such short notice, and I know it's very difficult because still with the quarantine, being in the jails and where the defendant will have his arraignment, whether it even happened today or whether it be continued the appointment of counsel, all of that's obviously fluid. So I want to introduce Senior Deputy District Attorney Jennifer Walker. I introduced her yesterday at the Sheriff's press conference. She will be the lead prosecutor in this case. I also want to introduce the team in the District Attorney's Office. There's obviously a lot more personnel behind this prosecution, but some of the very, very key people are here. I want to introduce Sean Nelson, our Chief Deputy, Pat Dixon, our Senior Assistant District Attorney, Keith Bogardus, Senior Assistant District Attorney, Beth Costello, Senior Assistant District Attorney, and of course Paul Walters, the Chief of the Bureau, Corey DeGraffinen, I said that wrong, DeGraffin Reed, she's a commander, and Sean Porter is also commander. So I want to thank them for being here. Last night I was at the prayer vigil at Christ Our Redeemer Church, and the pastor from the Geneva Church showed up. I don't think anybody was expecting to be there. For those of you who covered it, I saw it on the news last night and in print today. It was incredibly moving, and there's a lot of trauma and just disbelief in the community. I got a call from somebody today who turns out to be the neighbor, I mean literally 10 steps from Dr. Cheng's house. So, I mean, when we get right down to it, even though we have 3.3 million people in this county and we're very diverse, and obviously there's overtones of discontent in this particular case, in terms of national relations and other political discourse, we are really interconnected. We are really 6 degrees of separation in this county. And today there's a mass at 2 o'clock for Dr. Chang, and that's going to be a very, very difficult situation. I think I said yesterday, or I've said it in other interviews, that Dr. Chang's mother just lost her husband 3 months ago. That's Dr. Chang's father. Dr. Chang is survived by a wife and 2 children, and one of them is graduating from high school coming up, and that's going to be obviously a very, very difficult event. We have committed all the resources through our victim witness support, and Jennifer will oversee that with her investigator and her assigned victim witness, Melissa Melgard. We are going to do everything we can to support these victims. But as we know in homicide cases, they take a long time to prosecute, and it could be years. We just don't know. And the reason is I'm going to talk about the charges now, and these are very, very serious charges. And because, and I'll explain in a moment, death is potentially on the table, this case will probably be assigned, if it's a public defender case, we'll know more this afternoon. This will probably be assigned at least 2 public defenders, which is their normal course when the district attorney is considering death. Today, we formally filed 10 counts against the defendant, Chow. The first count is murder in the first degree against Dr. John C. It has an enhancement of lying in wait. I'll talk about that momentarily. It also has an enhancement for the personal use of a firearm. The lying in wait with the personal use of a firearm makes this case alone, without more, life without the possibility of parole, assuming we can prove all the charges and that the jury finds that the enhancements are true, or death. With respect to that whole deliberation, that will now open up a whole process that the district attorney's office engages in, and that is to hear from all sides. That means I'll be meeting with the victims when it's appropriate to get their view on the death penalty. I'll also be meeting with counsel once they're ready, assuming they want to meet and talk to us about the defendant and his past and why he may or may not be suitable, or why they might be asking for life without the possibility of parole or something else. That is the normal practice that I have in the district attorney's office, that I'm willing to hear from all sides, and it's a very deliberative process. I won't rush that process. It's a very solemn process. It's a very, very important process. And so that will take some time. And there'll be plenty of time to deliberate over this. Count 2 and through count 6 are all attempted murder on the other 5 victims with premeditation and deliberation. So the theory obviously is trying to kill all these particular victims, but it was premeditated and deliberated. That goes back to the whole idea of how this was all set up. And I'll get to that. And then counts 7 through 10 are the possession of 4 destructive devices with the intent to kill or to harm. And that goes to the explosive devices that we discussed yesterday at the sheriff's press conference with respect to the items that were found in another bag that had the smell of gasoline or some other substance, which led to the discovery of those explosive devices. The reason for the lying in wait, and the lying in wait is what gets us to the special circumstances, which gets us to life without the possibility of parole or death. When the defendant, although he's still not charged, I mean, we've charged our papers, but he hasn't been arraigned, but I'm going to refer to him as a defendant. When defendant Chow went into that church, he did everything he could to fit in, to make himself one of them. And even though originally when he came to the door, the greeters asked him who he was and why he was there, he had said some words to the effect that, oh, I've been here before, but they knew, because it's a small congregation, that that wasn't true. but they're parishioners and they're believers. And they will always welcome somebody into the congregation, or at least into the service, to celebrate with them. That is what these Christians did, and that's what Christians typically did. So he used that ruse to get in there and then make that entire room feel comfortable. He talked to individuals there, and he bought himself time to make these people feel comfortable with him. And then they were so comfortable at some point, and a lot of us have really struggled with this, and I've had this question and I've struggled with it too. How was it that they didn't notice that he was putting chains on the doors and locking the doors? I mean, I've been inside that. Jennifer and I were there on Sunday night. It is, I mean, the room probably is about the dimensions of one side of this room, maybe a little bit bigger, but it's pretty similar. And you would think if you're, at one of the round tables or engaged in this celebratory event, that you would notice if somebody was putting a chain around a door. And it appears that maybe one or two people did, but my point being is most didn't. And that's because he had set up a scenario where he made people feel comfortable. So they weren't alert to the danger, and he concealed his purpose. And I think that's one of the most interesting facts that leads to the lying in wait, that you can literally lie in wait. We typically think of the person who hides in the bushes to commit a murder or hides out in a closet to commit a murder, that they're lying there in wait until the target comes into view. This case is about a person concealing themselves in plain view through the fact that they made everybody so comfortable because they had led everybody to believe they were just there to celebrate the life of Jesus and the pastor coming back from Taiwan. So these 10 counts at this time, carry the maximum punishment allowed by law, which is death or life without the possibility of parole. And so the arraignment will be sometime this afternoon, we hope, and Jennifer will be making an appearance in that case. It's my intent to go to the Mass and pay my respects to the family. And so I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah, Michelle.
There was information that he was wearing a shirt that said security, and that's partly why when he was securing the doors, the congregants thought that he was doing a job. Can you comment on that?
So Jennifer, with her investigator and the Sheriff's Department, were reviewing all the video. There's quite a bit of video. There also appears, because we've seen some of the pictures, that some of the congregants took some cell phone photos, which I think have been released to your station. I think I saw them last night. And we have to get those. We have discovery obligations, and we're going to have to do everything we can to get that. We're still reviewing all the evidence. I mean, I will say hypothetically, because I don't know if that is accurate. We did have discussions, but we still want to, blow that up and see what the description was. But assuming it was, or something to that effect, that is another factor that goes to concealing yourself in other people's presence. And so it would just be one more fact that would help us with our case. But based upon all the other information we know at this time, it's not an additional fact we would have to have to, I think, have that finding be found as true. I do want to make this point before I take other questions, is that we have charged these counts and we've added these enhancements. And one of the things I think is so important for the public to understand is we still file enhancements in Orange County. We filed gun enhancements, and we filed, in this particular case, special circumstances of lying in wait. I'm very, very proud of the fact that we still do that in Orange County. And that's how we're getting to life without the possibility of parole or death. And I stand very firmly in the fact that enhancements are a very, very important tool for prosecutors to get justice for the victims. Any other questions? Yes, Vicki. So, sorry, the water went down the wrong way. Hold on a second. So that is another fact that I think all of us have been thinking about as well. There's additional evidence that's been collected that, I have to start again, hold on. Sorry, let me start that again. Okay, it's calming down. So I think that's a very interesting fact that all of us have been struggling with and deliberating on too, right? One was originally motive, and I think we have some insight. On that, we discussed that at the sheriff's press conference, and we're having the document that was found in the car interpreted and deciphered through additional experts. So Senior Deputy District Attorney Walker will be working with her team and the Sheriff's Department to try to really understand that document. So I really can't talk much about that document. There's other evidence that appears to have been found as well. That could, and I don't want to speculate. That's not a good thing to do when you're a prosecutor. That could indicate, we'll have the ability to understand it more. That could indicate that this church was just random, and it could have been any other Taiwanese church. And this was just the one that happened to be the one that was picked. We're still, again, going through the information. We don't understand that fully. There could be various theories here, but I think it's safe to say we're still trying to find that connection, if it exists, between that particular church, the one in Irvine, where he went at Geneva, and this event, and the pastor, and that whole event. Like, you would think, oh, celebratory event, pastor. That particular church, somebody who went there, they indicated they didn't know him. So it appears that his affiliation, if any, with that church was non-existent, which is a stumper, right, Amy?
Yeah, I mean, have you looked at or any evidence that indicates that the parishioners' ages or had anything to do with his choice to target them, either because of vulnerability or because of them being from a different generation of Taiwanese?
So again, really great. I mean, these are all the things that have been stumpers. I mean, these are the things we want to know. We won't necessarily know. I will just tell you this. That population in general created a vulnerable environment for him to carry out what I think was his ultimate goal, which was to execute in cold blood as many people in that room as possible. He had the ammunition to do it. He had the weaponry to do it. He had the training to do it. He was a security guard, licensed in Nevada, and he clearly had the opportunity and motive. So everything perfectly came together. I think I described briefly yesterday that when Dr. Cheng came over to subdue the defendant, the round went off, and of course, we know at least that round was, or a round, we'll know more after an autopsy, was a fatal round. But that weapon appears to have jammed, which is what created the opportunity for them for the pastor to subdue him, the defendant, with a chair, and then for other people to kind of tackle him and get to the ground. So there was a lapse of time. Something happened, an intervening event, the weapon malfunctioning, that gave people the opportunity to, get him to the ground. So, yeah, I mean, for all of you, these are all things that we're going to fully explore. If you think about it now, we're just 2 days into it. We've been, I think, as a community and government agencies, the sheriff's been, I think, extremely transparent. I do want to commend them. The work of the sheriff's department, the sergeant at the scene, just the work of the law enforcement in general has just been nothing but stellar. I have just absolutely great things to say. When she and I were there, Senior Deputy District Attorney Walker, on Sunday night, we got fully briefed. We walked through the crime scene. They have been nothing but forthcoming. We just have to get reports. Because of all the witnesses that were interviewed, a lot of the investigators were called out. I think I saw 20 investigators who were working with interpreters to get statements. So all sources were deployed, and we still don't have all those reports. Yes?
Can you talk about why a hate crime enhancement wasn't filed in this case and the thought process behind that?
So clearly we have motive, and there appears to be political and or nationalistic tensions here. But I met with the FBI yesterday, and they have an open investigation, as you heard. They have statutes that we don't have. For example, they have a statute under federal law of engaging in terrorist acts or injury to others or murder in a house of worship. They have that federal statute, which I believe would be a life case. The reason they're here is because they initially were dispatched because it appeared that this might be some kind of act of terrorism, mass shooting, and that's what they do, and that's what they specialize in. So I've made a commitment to work side by side with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney, and they're providing interpreters and all kinds of resources through Quantico that we have, but they're incredible experts. So I want, and I know that Senior Deputy District Attorney Walker wants this too. She's got to stand in front of a trier of fact, a jury, and prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. We have an ethical duty to bring forth both charges, like the ones I talked about today, and enhancements that we believe at the time we file we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. While we feel very, very strongly that this was motivated by hate, we want to continue to work with our law enforcement partners and the FBI to get all the additional evidence so that if we file the hate crime enhancement, we've done it knowing full well what the evidence is. So while we could, I think we could today, I feel a lot better, one, having all the evidence, and we haven't examined all of it. We've seen some things that are very, very intriguing, but we have to examine it. And two, I want to have a good relationship with my law enforcement partners, and I'm not going to turn away their offer of expertise. So I want, and I appreciate this, and I'm urging you please to report this properly, because otherwise my phone will blow up and my emails will as well. While there's very strong evidence right now that this was motivated by hate, we want to make sure that we have put together all the evidence that confirms that theory of the case. Yeah, Michelle.
And let me ask it a little bit differently, but as a follow-up. Taiwan News is reporting that he is a member of a radical pro-China group in Las Vegas. Are there any state charges that you could file, or is it strictly federal? Could it be federal and state?
Well, I described a federal statute that's very, very specific. about creating that kind of environment in house of worship. So the federal statutes are very, very complex, and they have some amazing tools the feds do, especially in sentencing, like we talked about in here about fentanyl, right? They get 20 to life, and we can't get those kinds of charges. They don't even have to prove the drug dealer knew it was fentanyl. So my relationship with the federal government has been very good, and I'm not going to jeopardize that. What they can do, I can't speak for them. But if we have evidence like that, and that's exactly the kind of evidence, we're going to be following all these leads, that would fit into our general category of a hate crime motivated by nationalism or a commitment to, a country or whatever. So we would be examining that kind of same fact pattern or that evidence consistent with what our state statutes. That doesn't preclude, and I think the FBI made it very, very clear yesterday. They have an open investigation, and as you know, the law is very clear. We can still have state charges like the ones we've filed today, and the feds can still file their case, and they can run concurrent. And one doesn't jeopardize the other. So we are moving forward with our case, and we're going to be in a full cooperative. What the public needs to understand is our law enforcement agencies should be working together to get justice in the case. And neither of us, either the feds or us as the district attorney, should have any parochial interests. We need to do what's in the best interest of this case. Yes?
With respect to the organization that Michelle was referring to out of Las Vegas, the National Union Unification Group, do you have any indication that anyone else from that group or that group was involved in any of the planning of this incident, of this crime? Are you looking into that at all, or can you say at this time that you're confident he acted completely independently?
So I'm old school. I believe you should never say never, and you should always look to where the evidence leads. This isn't, while we have our charges, this case is still being fully investigated. The sheriff made that very clear yesterday. The sheriff also did say that he's confident, his words, this was a lone wolf incident. I think a lot of you reported it that way. I have nothing to contradict what the sheriff said, and I hope he's right. At the same time, I think we all need to be very, very aware and cognizant of what's going on in our community, the other events around the world, and in the United States, in Buffalo and other places. And people need to be aware of their surroundings all the time. People need to be aware. And so whatever this works out to be, hopefully, for goodness sakes, the defendant was operating alone. If it turns out through further investigation, and the FBI, again, they're the experts on this, if they find, and we have our intelligence center here, and our intelligence center, our fusion center, the head of the fusion center was at the press conference yesterday. He was there at scene on Sunday, and he runs all the intelligence, the collective intelligence for all of our agencies here in Orange County, and it's overseen by the Sheriff's Department. So I'm telling you that if they hear or find out, and the chief and I get the bulletins almost every single day from, it's called OKAYAK, if they believe that there were others involved, there's part of a conspiracy or planning or whatever, I am confident they'll be the first people to know, and they'll be the first people to know something about it, and they'll be the first people to put out some information to warn the public. But at this time, the sheriff said what he said, which is he believes, and he's been briefed, and his investigation so far has shown this was a lone wolf.
The decision on the death penalty, how many months approximately does that take?
You know, every case is unique. Martin Schwartz, who's a public defender, has asked this office that if there are some cases that I review, I'm going to reverse engineer it for you. There are some cases that I get, and I can look at the facts, and I could make a decision quickly that it's not a death case. And so we inform the public defender or whoever has the defense has it, and we just let them know we're going to be pursuing life without the possibility of parole, assuming a special circumstance. This is not this case. I will share with you and that this case is definitely a case that I'm looking at for death. I'm not prejudging it. I told you I have a complete open mind. This is not a case that I'm going to inverse engineer it, that I'm ruling out death. The factors of going into a location and, with the intent to, I think the intent, in my mind was very clear what was going to happen. And the explosive devices really, really scare me about what could have happened if the plan had been carried out as I think it was intended. So this is a case that definitely, in Todd Spitzer's mind, death is something, an analysis I'm absolutely going to be going through. But it will be deliberative and won't be rushed. It's very similar to the Gaxiello case, the shooting of 4 individuals in Orange. That case has not been ruled out. That case is absolutely a death consideration case.
Do you have any indication or evidence about why he acted this weekend in particular? I know you say the church was just through vehicles, attacked the Taiwanese community. Why now? What's prompted that?
Again, we're going to be reviewing all the evidence, and if we find clues that tell us that, I've been very curious about that myself, looking at dates of different events in China and Taiwan and seeing if there was any particular or close date. There was a huge massacre in Taiwan that is very, very well known in that country. But that date is not even close. The massacre in Taiwan is not close to this date. So in my own mind, because that's the way I think, I've been doing a lot of my own research on different world events between those two countries. I yet haven't come up with anything. It doesn't mean that people smarter than me won't. All right, just one more question. Anything else? All right, thank you very much. And then Kimberly will give you the case number. Do we have it?
So just to reiterate, the defendant will be arraigned this afternoon in C55 at the Central Justice Center in Santa Ana. He will not be there physically present. He will appear via WebEx. The case number for your records and your request to film the court proceedings is 22 C as in Charlie, F as in Frank, 1168. Again, that is 22 CF 1168. And I have copies of the complaint and the press release for your, and I'll also send it out electronically. Thank you.
Can we check his last name? Is there any pronunciation? I mean, I've heard different names.
I would ask Corbin Carson for that. It's Cho.
Cho?
Cho.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, thank you for coming.
Well, good afternoon. Obviously, the biggest issue in the world right now and the most important issue on the floor of the Senate this week is assistance for Ukraine. As I think you know, I, along with Senator Brasso, Collins, and Cornyn, had an opportunity to visit this past weekend with President Zelensky in Kyiv. I think I can report what you've already recorded over and over again, the determination of the Ukrainian people to defeat the Russians, to push them out of Ukrainian territory. All they're asking from all of us is help, and we're providing significant help this week. We're not in this alone. This is not a charitable operation. The European countries have contributed mightily, not only in absorbing refugees, but in providing arms and support in every way. This is also important to remind those who think we ought to be focusing on Asia that both the Prime Minister of Japan and the Defense Minister in Japan say the single most important thing we can do to push back against potential Chinese aggression is to help the Ukrainians defeat the Russians in this current conflict. President Xi is watching as this unfolds. What is the message he takes out of this? It needs to be that this kind of aggression is counterproductive and will not produce an outcome that you want. We then went to Stockholm and to Helsinki and had the opportunity to be there just as they were debating their decision to request admission to NATO. Met with the Prime Minister in Sweden, the Prime Minister and the President in Finland. Enjoyed witnessing their enthusiasm for this big step. To show you what a big step it is in Sweden, they've not been a part of any alliance in 200 years. So this is a big step for the Swedes to go in this direction. As you know, Finland also has declared a kind of neutral position in between Russia and NATO. They're enthusiastically anxious to be a part of NATO now. Another outcome produced by Vladimir Putin's aggression. Both of these countries, however, being wary about the Russians over the years, are extremely well prepared to become part of NATO now. Finland already spends 2% of GDP. Sweden is rapidly approaching 2% of GDP. They both have highly successful militaries, much more successful militaries than some of the current members of NATO. So they are value added to the NATO alliance. What they're curious about is how long will it take us to ratify their admission, and I told them that our goal on an overwhelming bipartisan basis would be to get that done as rapidly as possible. Some procedural hoops through which we have to jump may prevent us from being first, but I'd love to be first, and we're going to do everything we can on a bipartisan basis to push admission to NATO as rapidly as possible.
There isn't a day goes by where we don't seem to see a new spike, or a new high, I should say, in gasoline and diesel prices at the very same time that the President's approval ratings hit new lows. I don't think that correlation is any coincidence. The high fuel prices in this country are attributable to this administration's policies, many of which have discouraged oil and gas production, energy production right here in the United States. Most recently is last week when the President took the Gulf and Alaska, some of these leases off limits, shut them down. It absolutely makes no sense if you're concerned about the pocketbook pain that the American people are experiencing on a daily basis, the higher prices that they're experiencing at the pump. You would think you would be working aggressively to try and open up more energy production in this country, but this administration seems intent on doing just exactly the opposite. And that has been their plan from the beginning. If you look back in the very earlier stages of this administration, whether it's oil and gas leases on federal lands, and even if they, in some of these places where they're issuing leases, you have to get a permit to drill, which they're not doing, or forcing long delays. It's just been an example of delays, shortages, and constantly higher prices for everything in this Biden economy. I would hope that the administration would think seriously about revising their strategy here, because at the moment, all it's doing is making the American people and the American economy harder for more working class families in this country. The latest example, of course, of the shortage is the baby formula shortage. And again, these are just basic issues that this administration, when it comes to taking care of the basic needs of the American people, seems to be completely out of step with. And I think the only thing, honestly, that's going to change that is a Republican majority in the Congress. And I hope that as people think about these issues as we head into the midterm elections this next fall, they're going to be thinking about those pocketbook issues, those issues that affect their economy and their family's economy in a very direct and profound way.
Today is the 8th day in a row that gas prices in America hit a new high today, $4.52 a gallon. That has profound impacts to people all across the country, specifically in my home state of Wyoming, where people on average drive more because the distances are further and the average miles driven is higher. Joe Biden seems committed to a long-time situation of high gas prices all across the country. If not, why does he continue to choke energy production in the United States? Just last week, he canceled 3 major lease sales, oil and gas, in the Gulf and in Alaska. And he can't have it both ways. When the president one day says it's Putin and the next day, the very next day, cancels these major oil and gas production leases, the American people see through this. The president has lost all credibility in terms of dealing with inflation or the cost of energy. At the same time, the American people have lost all confidence in the ability of this president to relieve the pain that they are living with every day. For people driving past a gas station and they see that number over $4 a gallon, most people wince because they know it's money that they're not going to have for food and groceries, for clothing, or to do things with the kids. And then the president has this big gimmick where he's going to release 1 million barrels of oil a day from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve all the way up till the election. Well, that has had no effect in relieving the pain at the pump. The only thing he's done is make us more vulnerable if a real emergency comes along, because that's what the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is for, real emergencies. The American people know we have the energy in the country, it is in the ground, and this administration will not let us get it out. This president is beholden to the climate elitists that call the tune for the Democrat Party. And that is why I say this president is committed to high gas prices for the long, long future, which is why 3 out of 4 Americans this weekend polled said they believe the country under Joe Biden and the Democrats is heading in the wrong direction.
Well, with the baby formula issue, another example that hits a whole other group of American families that often aren't thinking about the big economic issues of the day, of just making a decision without thinking about the consequences. Since about January 1, the FDA knew that there was potentially a problem at one of the big manufacturers of baby formula. About 60 days later, they shut that down, or negotiated a shutdown of that factory. They've still not established up until today the likelihood that the factory and the problem they were trying to solve were the right factory. But more importantly, you can't eliminate maybe 40% of the supply and not have impact. I was talking to somebody the other day who spent 4 hours in the car, went to 6 different stores to try to get the unique baby formula that their baby had to have. Talk about stress for families. You know, you can look at things, $28 million, I think, is what the House is talking about now. Whether it's $28 million or $228 million, it won't make any difference tomorrow. Won't make any difference probably a week from tomorrow. Looking at every option before you make that decision, like eliminating tariffs on Western European baby formula that meets all our standards, would have been something that the administration could have easily done months ago before the shelf supply in store after store after store went away.
Our American families are really feeling the weight of all of these Biden crises. We have the prices at the pump that Iowans are feeling, very hard hit, the highest inflation we've seen in 40 years. And now the Biden administration just seems to have lost all control over things just as simple as baby formula. Who would have ever thought that we would have a shortage of baby formula right here in the United States? I got a text a couple nights ago from a friend in Iowa, and he was imploring me because a young couple that he knows had a preemie baby, and that baby is being released from the NICU very soon. And mom and dad are struggling to figure out where the formula is going to come from for their newborn baby. You know, these are things that could have been foreseen, things that the Biden administration could have planned for and encouraged the FDA to work through. So I understand that Abbott and the FDA have an agreement to reopen their plant to produce baby formula, but the courts have to agree as well. So what are we to do in the meantime to support and help these families that need this baby formula? This is not some ordinary product that you can live without for a number of time, a period of weeks. When you need it, you need it. So whether it's importing from those other countries, as Senator Blunt had stated, whether it's solving our supply chain issues, or just something as simple as opening a plant, we need to do it. You know, these babies are in need, and we shouldn't be turning our back on these babies. So again, implore to the Biden administration, let's get these crises under control. Let's put some people in place that actually know what they're doing when it comes to supply chain management issues. We shouldn't be facing the type of inflation we are, the gas prices we are, and we certainly shouldn't be facing a baby formula shortage.
So across Florida, I'm getting texts, I've gotten phone calls, parents that are struggling. They're spending hours to try to find formula, and some of them can't find it. They're trying to figure out, can I take their baby off of formula and put them on milk now? And some parents are having to do that, and they know there might be some risk with that. You can't imagine that in the United States of America, parents are worried about feeding their children. Now, this is an American problem. I can give you pictures from all over the world. This is Panama. They've got plenty of baby formula. And this is the United States. No baby formula. I can give you pictures from Canada, from Israel, from other places, Brazil, all over the world. There's plenty of baby formula out there. The Biden administration needs to figure this out today. They need to figure out, they need to have all hands on deck. This needs to be solved this weekend. It can't be 2 months and wait until after the Abbott facility gets open. They've got to solve this now because parents are worried about feeding their children. I'm from Florida. We have a lot of people from Latin America. The Biden administration decided to be appeasers again to Cuba and Venezuela. That's despicable. We got nothing for this. After the Obama appeasement, let me give you one story. A lady had her hand chopped off right here, stuck in the mud. This was after Obama's appeasement. And you know what she did wrong? She complained that a school was being closed in Cuba. We're getting nothing for this other than there's a less of a chance that Cubans and Venezuelans are ever going to see democracy.
You've long said that you want electable candidates to emerge from Republican primaries. Does Kathy Barnett's candidacy in Pennsylvania, Kathy Barnett was denied the election results and criticism of her past statements, does it give you any concerns, and would you fully support her if she's a nominee?
Well, Manu, you're a pretty astute reporter. The election is today, and we'll take a look at it after we see who the nominee is.
Do you have any personal responsibility as a Republican leader to speak out on replacement theory, which is apparently one of the things that motivated the shooter in Buffalo, and which some of your members and candidates have talked about it to some degree?
Well, certainly the episode, this horrible episode in Buffalo, is a result of a completely deranged young man who ought to suffer the severest possible penalty under the law.
Leader McConnell, Senator Manchin says that the old Manchin-Toomey proposal to expand background checks is the only gun control proposal that could possibly pass the Senate. Do you see 10 Republican votes for Manchin-Toomey or any other gun violence measure?
Well, I'd love to be the majority leader. Hope to be after November, but that's a better question to ask of Senator Schumer.
Biden said today in Buffalo that the U.S. must reject the lie of racist replacement theory. Specifically, does the Republican Party need to reject it?
Look, the racism of any sort is abhorrent in America and ought to be stood up to by everybody, both Republicans, Democrats, all Americans.
Leader McConnell.
Yeah.
Is it your belief that Democrats are seeking amnesty for undocumented immigrants for the purpose of influencing and changing the electorate and giving themselves a political advantage?
What I'm disturbed about with regard to the southern border is the relative openness of it. This administration's taken a number of steps in the direction of just throwing our border wide open once again, and that ought to be addressed. It's something that could be done by the administration itself in the absence of any additional legislation, and keeping Title 42 in place would be a good first step.
Supplemental for baby formula?
Good afternoon, everyone. The babies. I usually say for the children today, for the children, for the babies. I was telling our colleagues that as they gather here, on the way in, we were driving behind a truck this morning. It said, for the babies on top. It had nothing to do with what we're dealing with now. It was just a regular delivery truck with things for the babies. But that's the centerpiece of all of this now. Our babies, the nutrition they receive when they are very young has such an impact on their entire lives. The security their families feel about taking good care of them is what our country is about. Today, the House Democrats are unveiling a new legislative agenda to ease the unconscionable infant formula shortage. There are two bold bills that we have. You'll hear about them. Bobby Scott, the chair of Ed and Labor, is on the floor with the Workforce Development bill, but he and Congresswoman Johanna Hayes have worked very hard on a bill that you'll hear about that talks about the WIC program. We're very honored to have on our side of the aisle, returning, a former member of the House, of whom we are very, very proud of her leadership and service, and now the chair of the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee of the Senate, which has the jurisdiction that Ed and Labor has over here to talk about that legislation that they have, as well as how it impacts the WIC program. And of course, Rosa DeLauro on appropriations as the chair. Rosa, before she was the chair of the almighty, powerful whole committee of appropriations, one time she was chair of the Ag Subcommittee, which has largely nutrition in it. So she knows of this issue well, and we'll talk about the appropriations bill coming forward on that. Mr. Pallone will be having hearings on this, and as others, Mr. Leader has informed me that Carolyn Maloney, and you may want to speak more to that, will be having hearings in the Oversight Committee as well, but we're going to hear from Mr. Pallone today. None of this could be possible without the speed and efficiency of getting this legislation to the floor in very short order. And the minute the leader heard about this issue and took it up with our chairs and the chairs committee, we were on our way. So thank you, Mr. Leader, for your knowledge of this issue, your appreciation for the urgency of it all, and for giving us this opportunity to vote on these bills this week. It's now my pleasure, privilege to yield to the distinguished Democratic Leader of the House, Mr. Hoyer of Maryland.
Gives me special status with somebody from Maryland. I am pleased to be here with the Speaker and with Madam Speaker. Thank you very much for grabbing this, going with it. I had a meeting with the chairs a week ago, and Rosa DeLauro, who's the chair of the Appropriations Committee, of course, meets with us, and she had done a lot of work on this and brought the facts to our attention and the problems to our attention. So I asked all the chairs that had any kind of jurisdiction to look at this. Obviously, the Appropriations Committee has a special role in terms of making sure there are resources to address this problem, but also Chairman Malone, Chairwoman Maloney, who's the Oversight Committee, Bobby Scott, the Education and Labor Committee, and a number of other committees, as the Speaker has pointed out, have jurisdiction to deal with these questions. There is nothing more critical to families than being able to feed their children. Throughout history, we have heard stories of parents living in poverty who will forego every need of their own just to get a little food or milk for their young children to survive and hopefully thrive. The circumstances that led to the current infant formula shortage will surely need to be investigated. And I know that will happen, both in the Appropriations Committee and other committees. Right now, however, Congress's focus ought to be on how to address the challenge and make sure all babies in America can get the nutrition they need in the first vulnerable months of life. I go to a grocery store called McKay's in Charlotte Hall, Maryland, a little community in southern Maryland, St. Mary's County. And I am amazed at the fairness of the shelves. And I don't have any young children with which I live, but my granddaughter has not infant children. She's 2 now, my youngest great-grandchild. But I think to myself, a young mom with infant children looking at those shelves and then having to go online and try to find some place where she can be confident that she has healthy food for her baby. That's why the House is moving forward to craft legislation led by Chairwoman DeLauro, Representative Hayes, Bobby Scott. Frank Pallone will be doing that. He's having a hearing next week when we have a committee week. Mothers across the country are looking to us for help. And we will not force them to face this crisis on their own. We're on their side. We'll see who's on their side when we vote on this legislation. I hope my Republican colleagues will be filled with what Shakespeare called the milk of human kindness. Today he may say the milk of human health, or the milk of human survival. So I hope my colleagues will join with us to move swiftly in addressing this pressing challenge. Let's get this done together, and let's get it done fast. So I want to thank all my colleagues, and I want to thank Senator Stabenow, who is the chair of the Ag Committee in the United States Senate, for the work that she is doing. And I know she's going to be speaking on herself, but we're glad that she's here and a partner in making sure that moms will be able to feed their infants.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. I just have to thank the speaker. I have to thank every leader that is up here for the focus, the sense of urgency, the understanding of what is going on. And, you know, I know that with a new baby, you just want to hold them close and not be frantically running through the grocery store or going online trying to find out whether or not you can get food for your baby. And so we understand that, and we are laser focused. I'm so pleased with Congresswoman Hayes, with Chairman Scott, to be focusing on the WIC program, which is about half of the babies in our country who get their food, moms and babies, through the WIC program and the baby formula. This is very, very important. We are working together on a bill, and we'll be jointly, both on language and hope that we can move this quickly, not only in the House, where I know they will move quickly, but in the Senate as well. I do want to say that when all of this came about, I very much appreciate the moment that USDA was notified, Secretary Beals acted quickly. I appreciate that. There are issues of making sure that they know through FDA what is happening when, so they can move quickly, but I very much appreciate that. I appreciate the President and what he's doing. We want to make sure there's more flexibilities. For example, when a family in Traverse City goes to the grocery store and there's only one brand on the shelf right now, and if it's not the approved brand under WIC, there's a problem, but USDA has said we're giving them the flexibility, and we want to make that permanent, that they can purchase what is available, safe and available. So there's a number of flexibilities that we are working on that are very, very important. And we want to make sure that when there's a shortage and there's a situation, that it's all hands on deck in the federal government. All the partners are talking to each other, and all of them are moving quickly. So I just want to thank all of my colleagues who are here, and proud to be your partner. This is something that Leader Schumer cares deeply about. We met in our leadership team about this last night, and we are anxious to work with the House to make sure moms and babies are getting the healthy food safely that they need. Thank you.
In the bill that is in the Senate is the counter to the bill that is in the House. Bobby Scott, chair of the committee, Congresswoman Johanna Hayes has taken the lead on this in the House. We're very proud of her leadership in this regard and eager to hear what she has to say.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As you just heard Senator Stabenow say, WIC recipients utilize formula at a rate double most other people in this country. About 50% of our babies rely on the WIC program for milk, and that is disproportionate. I spent this morning in my office returning calls to people in my district who had reached out. They started a Facebook group to try to figure out when and where they can buy formula. People are selling samples on the street. Mothers are watering down formula. Quite frankly, they're desperate. This is what I heard person after person after person that I spoke to this morning. But I'm very excited that Congress is taking action today to help our most vulnerable families. Over the past few weeks, Speaker Pelosi, in every meeting that we've been in, has raised this issue of this crisis about formula shortage. I'm excited to work with leadership and introduce the Access to Baby Formula Act, which really is a backup plan There should have been a backup plan for when there was a recall for families who receive WIC, how they would be able to access formula. This bill provides a waiver to authorize the governing bodies to address emergencies, disasters, and supply chain disruptions, which will help us prepare for future events. I'm very excited to be able to work with Chairman Bobby Scott on this issue. I chaired the Nutrition Subcommittee on Ag, but WIC falls ed and labor. So what this bill shows is that Democrats are aligned on this issue and really working together, not only to open up the supply chain to get milk and baby formula back on the shelves immediately, but long-term, to make sure that we have a plan in place so that this never happens again. I can tell you that I understand completely what parents are going through right now. I was a participant in the WIC program. I know what it means to not be able to stretch out milk through the entire month. And that's what I heard this morning on the phone from these parents and grandparents that I was talking to. What I'd like to tell them is that their words are not falling on deaf ears, that we see them and we hear them, and we are working very hard in Congress to address this rising concern. With everything going on right now, the last thing a family should have to worry about is feeding their children. So again, very excited that we are bringing this legislation to the floor of the House and that we will act swiftly and vote on it and move it to the Senate so that we can get some much needed relief to these parents and their children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johanna, for bringing your personal experience to the situation. As you were speaking, I was thinking of those who've gone before us in the Congress who established the WIC program, women, infants, and children, and the long view of what we need for our children, and such an important initiative. Again, Congress, that falls under the Ed and Labor Committee. Congresswoman DeLauro has been tracking these issues as chair of the Appropriations Committee, but long before that. And she's going to give us the full picture of where we're going to go with the money and what we have to do. I'm very proud of our president, who has said we must deal with this quickly, but safely and cautiously. That's what the chairwoman is doing. Congresswoman DeLauro.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you so much for gathering us here today and for all the work that's been done by my colleagues on what is a serious issue, what is a critically important issue. And if I might, I just would like to give a shout out as well to the chair of the Ag Appropriations Committee, that's Chairman Bishop, who has been engaged and involved in this effort as well. It is a very serious problem in this country. Parents, as you've heard, struggling. And parents are struggling. People today live paycheck to paycheck. They are now scrambling to find the formula to feed their babies in what is the wealthiest nation in the world. There are two parts to the infant formula shortage: safety and supply. We should not have to, parents should not have to choose between these two things. We should not be creating what is a false dichotomy. The bill that I introduced this morning immediately addresses the shortage, the here and now, by quickly trying to get product on the shelves and help to prevent it from not happening again. The shortage was caused in large part by corporate greed and consolidation. There are only 4 manufacturers of infant formula in the United States. Only 4. So that when one piece, Abbott, is pulled out of the equation, which services the WIC program, as has been stated here today, 1.2 million babies. They have the contract for that. When you pull that up, you see what you can then vision the shortage on the shelves. In this case, it was Abbott Nutrition put profits and production over people, and due to what is a disgraceful lack of oversight, is now causing parents and caregivers to struggle to feed their kids. The images, empty shelves, desperate parents, are heartbreaking. What the legislation does, it provides $28 million in new funding for the FDA. It will provide FDA urgently needed resources to address the shortage, to prevent fraudulent products from entering into the marketplace, to help acquire better data on the situation in the marketplace, and to prevent the shortages from happening again. We strengthen their workforce focused on formula issues and increase FDA inspection staff. In response to a question that I asked the FDA and how they would be able to review infant formula submissions, I was told that they have only 9 people to do this. And this would be coming from domestic manufacturers, foreign manufacturers, to be able to look to see if this is a quality project, if it meets our standards. And what this will also allow the FDA to do with the resources is to look at FDA facilities around the world. There are 7 in Europe, 2 in Mexico, and there may be others that may come online. So that what happens is that then we can be in touch and we can get that product that they are producing, again, from an FDA-approved source, and we have to making sure that we have a standard and of which to compare the product with. So the FDA plays such a critical role in ensuring that formula provides the full nutritional needs of infants and that it is manufactured in the safest way possible. Today, we are making sure that the lack of funding is not a barrier to getting safe formula to parents and to babies. Meeting the need today is necessary. No baby goes hungry. No parent has to struggle to find the food to feed their child. And the efforts for the future will help ensure that we're not forced to go back and recreate this desperate situation. This is, it's not enough. As the speaker pointed out, people are doing different things. We're talking about WIC, we're talking about Energy and Commerce, doing hearings, but we have to address have to have people who are accountable. You understand that at least 2 babies died, 4 more hospitalized. And I recently released a whistleblower report which highlighted a damning list of allegations of wrongdoing at the Abbott Nutrition Factory that was producing the formula. Recalls happened, but this company has lied, it's cut corners, it falsified records to cover up misdoings at the sake of infant health. That's wrong, just plain wrong. The Ag Appropriation Subcommittee is going to hold a hearing on Thursday with the FDA Commissioner. We have a hearing the following week with experts and stakeholders in the effort. An IG report has been ordered That takes a while, as you know, but to look at accountability, there will be an additional piece of legislation which provides authority to more authorities to the FDA, and we'll look at the opportunity for the Defense Production Act. So the work is not done. We're going to continue, all of us, to work hard to get to the long-term root causes so that this does not happen again. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce the Chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Frank Palazzo.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you, Madam Speaker, and everyone really who's been involved in this, not only in the last few weeks, but long-term. And I want to develop a little bit what Rose has said about the safety aspect of this as well as the supply aspect, because a lot of attention has been focused on the supply and, of course, the shortage, particularly with regard to Abbott, their product being recalled. But as has been mentioned by my colleagues, we have to look at this in both ways, right? I mean, I know that, I was the author of the Food Safety Act years ago, and some people came up to me, within the last few days and said, well, if they hadn't recalled the Abbott formula, then we wouldn't be in this mess today. And I was like, are you kidding me? Babies died, kids got sick. You can't look at it that way and say, well, we shouldn't do a recall, because over the years, we've been very careful to say that there are problems here, and that if formula is contaminated, then it shouldn't be sold. And that's what Abbott was doing. And so the answer here is to look at both of these, make sure that we have the supply and we get rid of the shortage now. But in terms of what we have to do as the authorizing committee in Energy and Commerce, and this is what our hearing is going to be about next Wednesday, is what needs to be done in the future to make sure that this crisis doesn't happen again. And that involves not only supply, but also making sure that the way the FDA goes about determining what's recalled and what's contaminated is done often enough, the testing is done often enough, and quickly enough. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is the fact that right now we don't really have an immediate or quick way of finding out whether there is a shortage. And so one of the things we may very well do is legislation that says that they have to notify us about what kind of supply they have. They have to notify the FDA what kind of supply, and also that if we find this contamination, that this is quickly figured out how to correct it so that the supply is back on the market again. These are the kinds of problems that we're facing. So I just wanted to say, just so you know, the hearing is next Wednesday. We have both the FDA Commissioner Califf, the Food Policy and Response Deputy Commissioner Yanis, and the Center for Food Safety Director Main are going to be at next week's hearing. And we have the three companies, Abbott, Gerber, and Reckitt, and senior people within those organizations, which basically those are the three companies that produce about 80% of the supply. And I also wanted to mention that tomorrow our committee has a full committee markup on the FDA user fee to reauthorize the way that we pay and authorize drugs. And one of the provisions that's in that package makes it easier for FDA to recruit and retain highly qualified staff across the agency, including areas overseas where we need inspection. And I believe that your appropriation bill pays for more staff and training of staff as well, inspectors as well. So these are all things that need to be done, and I just want to thank all my colleagues for everything that we're doing to deal with this problem immediately and also make sure that this does not happen again. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. When you mentioned the user fees and everything at the FDA, it'd be important to see what the appetite is for a user fee for the food part of Food and Drug Administration. Because if we could get a user fee on the food side, we could have a much bigger budget for staffing the rest on the food side of Food and Drug Administration, A. B, the FDA has no power to recall. We say recall, but it really is a moral suasion issue. The Food and Drug Administration can say something is wrong with this, and then the public reaction to it is effectively the company would then perhaps recall. But there is no power. We have it in the BBB, we've had it in the BBE, in hopes that we could pass it there when we haven't been able to get it over time in other legislation that requires a strong bipartisan vote. So in terms of recall, when we use that term, it is not the power of recall. It's the persuasion of a company recalling voluntarily. So you see, we have a stronger hand to play here if we would be willing to do so. There is also some attitude in the country that there is plenty of supply. It's just not all in the right places. But there must be a computer program that tells us where that is. If that is so, then let's get that moving right this minute into the mouths of babies. We fight all the time not to take food out of the mouths of babies, as some initiatives might result in. As mother of 5, grandmother of 9, a long time ago for me, I can still hear a baby cry. The baby is hungry. A mother should not, a parent, dad, mom, grandparents, whomever, caregiver should not have to hear a baby cry without being able to fulfill the need, to anticipate the need. Again, it must be safe. We have to be cautious in how we proceed, but we have to do this as quickly, as safely possible. So with that, we're pleased to take any questions.
Madam Speaker, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how this $28 million is going to, it seems like it's going to FDA, but is there a world in which FDA can then put that money to the companies that'll actually be needing to overstaff with production stuff, or it just helps on the approval side?
No, what this does is divide it up into infant formula and supply chain monitoring and assessment for $1.5 million. Health fraud, state partnerships, laboratory methods development, $3 million to the Office of Regulatory Affairs. Social media data capture, analysis to identify unsafe infant formula so we can track stuff online, and that's $500,000. Then it's infant formula and staffing. It's $23 million. The Speaker's forced to be able to do that and to do it in a timely way. The other piece, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to look at companies who want to try to provide us with a product who may not be FDA approved. That is a submission. 9 people. That's it. So the crux of this is providing infrastructure, if you will, in order to do what needs to get done, and that is about as quickly as possible how we get product in and get it on the shelves. And that is what this is about. It's supply chain, it's data, it's looking at fraud. My God, you could have anybody coming forward and say they do this, they do that, and so forth, unless we have a standard to which to judge them by, and unless we can inspect and look at all of this, you know, we take a very big risk. And today, what the Speaker spoke about, mothers, parents today are saying, okay, and that they go to a pediatrician and say, what should I do? And the pediatrician may even say, take a chance because it's maybe okay. But think about it as being a mother. You need to feed your baby, and then you're scared that if what you feed your baby is going to cause harm. So what we want to do is to provide the resources as quickly as we possibly can, get this done, then take up the issues of accountability. And I talk about accountability at the FDA as well, because they dragged their feet for several months before there was a recall. And the Speaker is right. We don't have any power of recall. It's the company who determines whether or not they're going to recall the product.
Madam Speaker, the White House says they've been working on this since February, but Congress is not acting until months later. So my question is, if the $28 million in emergency, the White House press secretary said that they've been tracking this issue since February. So my question is, if the $28 million in emergency funding and the changes to WIC had happened months ago, could Congress have helped prevent the catastrophic shortage that we're seeing today?
Look, can I just say this? The Biden administration has been taking action since February. I just have 3 things that we know. They provided more flexibility for the WIC program to boost accessibility. They worked with manufacturers to increase production and encourage importation of safe formula. So I think the bottom line is they have been taking action, but we really feel that now more needs to be done. And that's why we're talking about Rose's bill, we're talking about the other bill with WIC, and then further authorizing bills down the line, which is, what Energy and Commerce is looking at. But you just have to be, you have to understand, I'm not trying to be difficult, that this is complex. Like, one of the things that bothers me is that I found out in the last couple of days, I told you guys, that people are now ordering, I guess through the mail, formula from Canada and other countries, and in some cases, that's been the Abbott stuff that's already been taken off the market here. And so, this is an issue where it's not just a question of supply, but safe supply. And that's part of the problem, is to make sure that this stuff that's being recalled is not being used, and that what we're going to use now is safe.
But my follow-up is...
USDA, I hear your question. USDA moved very quickly, as you heard Senator Stabenow speak about, in terms of, they're only, and why you have the education and labor piece of legislation is to give WIC and the USDA more power. Because in fact, Secretary Vesak does not deal with moving the pieces around. He has provided flexibility to a beneficiary so that they can more easily get access to the product. What we're trying to do is to provide him with more authority, and he did that. Quite honestly, in the first stories that came out, speaking of, this is before I even knew of a whistleblower's report, I called for an Inspector General investigation of a delay of from last October until a recall in February by the FDA. And why? Now, that's going to take a while, okay? Now, but in the meantime, the issue and the crisis is now. So how do we, in the very short order, provide them with what they need in terms of FDA to be able to bring a product back? We're going to look at other pieces about strengthening their authorities and holding people's feet to the fire. We are going to investigate Abbott, and the chips should fall where they may. People have to be accountable, whether it is at FDA or whether it is at Abbott.
I just may say, seeing the problem is very important, but understanding it very carefully is too. Some babies need a very special kind of formula. Only one manufacturer makes that. It became contaminated. You say when you find out about the issue, then you look into it. What is the nature of this? What is it that we have to address? That was one part of it. When Rosa, Madam Chair, referenced the babies who died, they were the ones who needed this special formula, and it has a special category, and that was contaminated. And that's sinful. It was. And so that's one thing they'll be looking at. And then, of course, the fungibility of this, when everybody then runs to the next category, then you have the shortage. And this supply chain issue is one that is rearing its head in many ways. It's the here and now and in this moment. I think that when all of this is done, I'm not associating my colleagues with what I'm going to say right now, I'm just saying it myself. I think there might be a need for indictment. Any other questions?
Madam
Yes, ma'am.
Speaker, I want to ask, Senator John Cornyn expressed some doubt on whether or not $20 million was necessary. There may be other Republicans who share some of that skepticism that this money is so urgently needed, arguing that this might be more of a supply chain problem. I know you've addressed that, Congresswoman, but I'm curious, do you have concerns that Republicans in the Senate may not support this legislation?
I can't answer for what the Senate will do, but $20 million is it's a lot of money, 20 million with an M. But anybody who says that that's too much money to spend for the safety and well-being of our babies, I just don't agree with, period. That's not, and this was a very crafted number. It wasn't, well, what's the most we can spend? It's what is the most effective we can spend.
And understand in the piece of legislation, there is a provision that says that the FDA has to report to the House Appropriations and the Senate Appropriations Committee every week on the utilization of the funding so that we know what is happening and that they are accountable for the use of that fund.
One more question.
Madam Speaker.
Why is the WIC bill not on the schedule until Thursday? Isn't that more important than naming another post office earlier in the week?
Well, we have to have a regular order. Right now, the committee has the workforce development legislation on the floor of the House, which is very important to us. We went to rules today to be able to bring the WIC bill to the floor, and of course it will have to go through the Senate as well, so it's not holding anything up. The Senate will be dealing, my hope and understanding is, with the Ukraine legislation the next couple of days.
Madam Speaker, one quick question about timing. The FDA has said that with their new guidelines on importation, they'll start to see improvements on the shelves in the next couple months. How quickly do you think the 28 million supplemental could yield results?
Well, yes, let me address that in this way. And I read the guidance from the FDA, and while I believe it is a good step in trying to move forward, I am disappointed in this, that we will look at both foreign and domestic facilities that are not FDA approved. I believe we ought to be doing business with FDA approved facilities, and I believe that would be a much quicker process, because if they are not FDA approved, as I pointed out before, you have to do the investigation, you have to visit, you have to do all of those things. So if we could go, and we have 7 overseas facilities at the moment. They're in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Ireland, in Denmark. So there are several where my view is that we could go, it's FDA approved, that product could be immediately brought back to the U.S. So in a much more timely way. I agree with you. We can't wait 2 months to have this.
So is that what your bill would help speed up the inspections of?
No, yes, it would do that, and the bill also would allow for the ability to get the product from an FDA already approved facility. We have facilities that have passed inspections. Let's go there first, and then let's get a product back and get it on the shelves as quickly as we can.
So if you're, sorry, one last question. If your bill is passed, how quickly do you think that American supermarkets and stores would start to see the results?
Well, my hope is that, look, we think we got to pass it in the House, which we will do. We'll pass it we have to see about the Senate. And so as quickly as that process, and I wouldn't understand why anyone would not want to move as quickly as we can with giving people the wherewithal to get the product to bring it back here. Because this is not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. This is about the risk and the life of babies in this country.
If I just may say, there are a couple things happening. One is that we want to know, is there, as has been told to us, that there is product in our country. It's just a question of where it is and where it needs to be taken to. We said, let's use the vaccine, shall we say, model of transferring to localities, if that's possible, because the FDA is not a transportation agency, and nor is the Department of Agriculture. But there are, that's what we're looking into, are they private sector facilities that can move that? What is that? How much is that? Could be 80%. If so, we would have stuff on the shelf right away. But we don't know, and that's what we're finding out, A. B, remember, during COVID, it was almost impossible for the FDA to travel to foreign countries to inspect plants. So that has been a setback. I'm not just talking about baby food formula. I'm talking about other sources of FDA-approved products that would come to the United States. You know that, Frank. They were not able to travel or able to get into these plants because of COVID. So that is a setback. So we want it as soon as possible, right now, and why isn't it, and how much can we get fast, safely? The President keeps saying safely. Is Australia approved or not?
No.
They have supply. We have to see if they're approved. So it's not just a question of, oh, it's there, let's buy it, let's bring it in. Safety is very important in all of that. And having our bill on Wednesday is not holding anything up, because it still have to pass the Senate, which is occupied happily now, not happily, but thank God, on Ukraine right now, so that they can do that tomorrow and then be on their schedule shortly thereafter. We would hope that this will be, in terms of the WIC bill, Congresswoman Johanna Hayes and Debbie Madam Chair Stabenow's bill, hopefully that would be overwhelmingly bipartisan. We'll see where this goes. We have to go. Thank you so much.
joining us. You know, this is my 10th trip to the border as the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the first thing that I want to express is how incredibly proud and honored I am to stand behind these individuals, members of the Department of Homeland Security, United States Border Patrol, Air and Marine Operations, Office of Field Operations, again, United States Border Patrol, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Enforcement and Removal Operations, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Homeland Security Investigations. This represents what we are doing to address the challenge of the southwest border. We're bringing all of the resources, talent, and extraordinary commitment of the personnel of the Department of Homeland Security to bear. It is very important to note that while, of course, we are preparing for the end of Title 42, based on the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's decision that it will end on May 23rd, that does not mean that the border is open beginning on May 23rd. We continue to enforce the laws of this country. We continue to remove individuals who do not qualify for relief under the laws of this country. A few weeks ago, I published, in response to questions with respect to the preparation and plans of the Department of Homeland Security with respect to the end of Title 42, I published details with respect to those plans, the preparation of which began in September of last year. We knew very well that the CDC's Title 42 authority would not be around forever, and it is our obligation, as well as the way we conduct ourselves, to be prepared for changes in the landscape, and that is indeed what we did beginning in September of 2021. And I outlined in a 20-page memorandum the 6 lines of effort, the 6 pillars of activity that undergird our plans once Title 42 goes away. And I should say that the elements of these plans are already underway, are already being implemented on an increasing level, given the level of migration that we are encountering on the southwest border. And let me outline the 6 pillars, the 6 lines of effort right now. First, we are surging resources to the southwest border: personnel, facility, medical resources, transportation. Second, we are improving the efficiency of our processing without compromising the security and integrity of our screening and vetting of individuals. Deciding and assessing how we can deliver greater efficiencies in the processing of our forms, the completion of forms that input information with respect to the backgrounds of the individuals whom we are encountering at the border. Third, we are elevating the enforcement consequences that we are bringing to bear to those individuals who do not qualify for relief. We are expanding the use of expedited removal, for example. We previously issued a regulation that empowers asylum officers in one of the agencies of the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, to make the ultimate adjudication decision, the ultimate judgment of whether an individual qualifies for asylum relief or not. Right now, until that regulation takes effect at the end of this month, right now, immigration judges who are suffering a $1.6 or $1.7 million, 1.6 or 1.7 million case workload and overwhelmed docket. Right now, they have exclusive jurisdiction. We are giving the asylum officers that jurisdiction. That is going to take what is now on average of a 6 to 8 year plus process between the time of encounter and the time of ultimate asylum adjudication to under a year. Those are 2 examples of the consequence regime that we will bring to bear, not to mention, of course, criminal prosecutions of individuals when the facts so warrant. 4, we are working on bolstering the capacity of non-governmental organizations and local jurisdictions to address the different challenges that increased migration bears upon them. They have been instrumental in our ability to address the challenges thus far. We recognize that with the end of Title 42, there very well may be an increased surge in migration, and we have to equip them with the resources and capabilities to address that increase as well. 5, we are disrupting and attacking the smuggling organizations and the transnational criminal organizations in an unprecedented way, at an unprecedented level, not just with the tremendous resources of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, whether it's Homeland Security investigations, Operation Sentinel, whether it's Blue Indigo, or so many of the different law enforcement efforts that we have, but also in close partnership with the Department of Justice and the other law enforcement agencies and departments across the federal enterprise, and with our partners to the south. And 6, we are addressing the challenge of irregular migration, not by ourselves, but with our partner countries. In the last several weeks, I have been to Costa Rica, and I have been to Panama, and I have spoken regularly with my counterpart in Mexico about what is a regional challenge. The increase in migration that the United States is experiencing is not exclusive to the United States. There are more than 1.8 million Venezuelans in Colombia right now. The population of Costa Rica is approximately 2% Nicaraguan, based on the movement of people from their countries of origin by reason of so many different factors. Economic despair, violence, distress caused by natural disasters, all made more acute, all aggravated, of course, by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a multi-pronged approach to what is a very dynamic situation. We are addressing it across the Department of Homeland Security, across the federal government, with our state and local partners, and with our partners and allies south of our border. And with that, I look forward to your questions.
Good afternoon, Secretary Mayorkas. You have talked in the past about replacing Title 42 with Title 8. Could you explain to the public specifically how that would work, and what would be long-term ramifications, such as if someone tried to re-enter and they were dismissed on Title 8?
So I'm not sure everybody heard the question that we are, with the end of Title 42, we will be expanding our use of Title 8. What does that mean? And I want to explain, and I'll try to be brief in this. But Title 42 is a public health authority that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention holds. And what that calls for is that because of the public health imperative in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, we do not process for removal individuals, but rather have the authority under the CDC's guise to expel them. So they do not have a removal, an immigration enforcement removal on their record. They are merely processed and turned around and repatriated to the country of origin. What we are doing, we are now using Title 8 in a number of different contexts, but what we will be doing is expanding that use. If Title 42, or when Title 42 is no longer something that we are able to use under the CDC's direction, then we will only use that immigration enforcement authority. Everyone should understand that when we release individuals who are not detained in our immigration custodial system, they are not merely released into the United States, but rather they are placed in immigration enforcement proceedings. And that is where they make their claims for relief under the laws of this country, make a claim for asylum. If they qualify, then they've established a basis to remain. If they don't, they are removed, and they have an enforcement record on the books.
Hi, Secretary. You mentioned that by the end of this month you expect to roll out the asylum overhaul.
I'm sorry,
rule.
it's a little hard to hear.
Can you hear me now? Or,
yeah. That's better, and I'll repeat your question.
Okay, sure. So you mentioned that at the end of this month you expect to roll out the asylum overhaul rule. From what we understand, it will initially be implemented on a limited basis. When do you expect to be able to implement this asylum rule across the entire border? And where are you going to hold individuals when these screenings, the initial ones, are conducted? Are you setting up processing centers like they have in Europe?
So Camilo's question is, with the asylum officer rule that we are implementing at the end of the month, will we be implementing at full scale, or will it be a ramp-up process, and how will we actually implement that rule? So one thing that everyone has to understand is that the agency that administers the asylum officer rule is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And it is an agency that is funded primarily by the application fees that people pay to receive immigration benefits under our legal immigration system. And the law provides that that agency is to recalibrate the fees it charges every 2 years. Those fees have not been recalibrated for more than 6 or 7 years. And that agency was on the brink of bankruptcy. And that agency has been decimated. And we have been hiring additional asylum officers to be able to implement the asylum officer rule, and we will be upscaling the implementation over time and using it very efficiently to have the greatest impact on the immigration system, because what we are talking about is delivering justice quickly, not compromising due process, but delivering asylum justice quickly. And what that means is if one qualifies, then that determination is made more rapidly than it has been in the past. And if one does not qualify, then that determination is made more rapidly than in the past, and a removal will promptly follow. So Alicia, we do intend to bring criminal prosecutions when the facts so warrant. And we will be increasing the number of criminal prosecutions to meet the challenge, because the fact of the matter is there are more cases that warrant criminal prosecution than the cases that are being brought. And I want to say one very important thing. We're a nation of immigrants, and we are also a nation of laws. And we enforce the law, and we will continue to do so. And the decisions that we make in the enforcement context are based on the facts that are presented to us.
Secretary, a two-part question. One, how many migrants are we prepared to process every day should Title 42 lapse? And what is DHS going to do if that federal judge in Louisiana decides that Title 42 should remain in place?
So I'm going to take those in reverse chronology. If the district court makes a decision, the Department of Justice, as the legal representative of the executive branch, will assess what the next step should be based upon the judge's decision and the reason underlying underlying it. I'm sorry?
So you're following whatever the judge is going to decide in this case?
Well, it is our responsibility to abide by a court order, and the options that will be available to us will be determined by the Department of Justice, the legal representative. That is a legal analysis. And of course, it may depend on what particularly is the reasoning of the court underlying the decision that the court makes. And your second question, or your first question?
How many migrants?
So what we have done, so the question, how many migrants do we want to, are going to be processing a day? Let me turn again to these individuals here. I cannot overstate the talent, the commitment, and the dedication that these individuals and all of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security whom they represent, what they embody. Because I will tell you that we are addressing a level of migration that is historic, and they are doing an extraordinary job in managing the current flow. As the plans that we published a few weeks ago evidence, what we have done is not necessarily predict the flow that we might encounter, but rather we have planned for different scenarios that could in fact materialize. Without predicting, it is our responsibility to prepare and plan for different possibilities, and that is what we have done.
Thank you. Just two questions, if you don't mind expanding on what ways the NGOs will be receiving assistance. I believe that was one of the pillars, I think, number 5. And the other question I have is if you could talk a little bit about what today meant, or what DHS means for today to mean to migrants who will be seeing this coverage.
So the second question, forgive me.
Oh, it's really just about messaging. What kind of message do you hope today's event sends out to migrants?
It's a very important message. We have articulated it before, and allow me to articulate it. Allow me to say it again. And I must say that as the temperature rises seasonally, we see the tragedy more of individuals placing their lives in the hands of smugglers who only seek to exploit them for profit. As the situation unfolds, last week we saw a tragedy in the maritime environment, not on land but at sea, with a vessel of Haitians capsized and a number deceased. Do not place your lives in the hands of individuals who only seek to exploit your lives for the sake of profit. We are building safe, orderly, and humane pathways to access the benefits that the law provides and that Congress has passed. But traveling from one country to another in the hands of smugglers, only to be met by the enforcement authorities of the United States government, is not the way to achieve relief. The border, the laws of the border will be enforced. If one does not qualify for relief, one will be removed. The smugglers peddle misinformation. We see the misinformation that they peddle. That Title 42, for example, does not apply to certain populations. That information is false. You place your life savings in the hands of exploitative individuals. You put your lives at risk based on the misinformation that they peddle to you, only for you to be expelled or only for you to be removed under the laws. If you have a claim for relief, of course the laws provide that that relief will prevail. But so many do not qualify, and so many are harmed en route. So if I understood your question, if I heard it correctly, how are we working with Mexico? In very, very close partnership. I spoke with my counterpart, actually the Foreign Secretary Ebrard, within the last 2 weeks, and the Department of Homeland Security team was down in Mexico just a few days ago. Our relationship is very close. The cooperation from a law enforcement perspective is seamless. We have mirrored patrols. We are sharing information. We are bringing their interdiction capabilities to bear where it is appropriate. They are surging their resources based on our shared understanding of the movement of people and the conduct of the cartels. We have brought prosecutions. We have achieved extradition of criminal leaders. We are working hand in glove with our partners to the south, and we're extraordinarily grateful for their partnership. And I should say that not only are we working very closely with them in the enforcement arena, but we are also collaborating with them at an unprecedented level to achieve the promise of economic prosperity and economic development between our largest trading partner and the United States. The President's infrastructure bill calls for an unprecedented investment in funds to modernize, for example, our ports of entry. These are remarkable opportunities for these two countries to really use the ports as an engine of prosperity for this community and for others similarly situated.
Texas is doing their own efforts as well to protect the border, with Texas military, DPS troopers, and busing migrants to Washington, D.C. What's your take on that? Are there any coordination efforts between both DHS and the Texas?
So did everybody hear that question? What is our coordination effort with the state of Texas? Today I met with law enforcement leaders, civic leaders, prosecutors, and of course our tremendous personnel in the Department of Homeland Security. Cooperation with state and local officials, whether it's Texas or other states along the border, has been long-standing, has been historic, and we're grateful for that cooperation and that partnership. But let me emphasize the word cooperation and coordination and collaboration. Those are essential elements of effective enforcement of laws, whether they be laws of relief, of humanitarian relief, or laws of accountability. We saw the result of an uncoordinated, uncollaborative effort in the screening of trucks that had an incredibly adverse impact on the economy here in McAllen and elsewhere along the border, and I heard that loud and clear earlier today from local officials. But we also saw where the coordinated, collaborative work can have an effective impact on our work when we were on the river here, and we saw their boats patrolling, and it became a force multiplier. We also saw force multiplication extraordinarily ably in watching how we use technology as well as our personnel on the ground to gain visibility of what is going on along the border and to respond accordingly.
Secretary, administration officials have said that the Biden administration is continuing the COVID-19 public health emergency beyond July 15th. Does that change plans with Title 42? And really quickly on Buffalo, what would you tell the victims' families about the role of government to prevent racially motivated violence, which you've labeled a threat to the homeland? And what is the right balance for DHS to identify problematic posts and not intrude on people's rights?
Two questions. One with respect to COVID-19 and how long it will be in effect. And we are required to defer to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They have made a decision that Title 42's effectiveness will end as of May 23rd, and we will act accordingly. With respect to the tragic events in Buffalo this past Saturday, and I've articulated to local leaders, I've expressed to the local leaders in Buffalo that day and since, and I've expressed to national leaders our profound sorrow and the fact that our hearts break with the families and loved ones of the victims of that tragic hate crime that cost 10 lives and victimized others. And I think it's very important, Priscilla, that I communicate very quickly that in the world of targeted violence, when one community is targeted, we're all targeted. That is the fundamental value and principle of this country. Domestic violent extremism is one of the greatest terrorism-related threats that we face in the homeland. And we play a very important role. We understand, of course, the fundamental First Amendment right of free speech, and that individuals can espouse an ideology no matter how hateful it might be. But we in the Department of Homeland Security become involved when those expressions of hate, when false narratives or conspiracy theories propagated on social media or other online platforms, when they have a connectivity to violence, when they threaten the security of the homeland, that is when we get involved. And we have a number of measures already well underway, and we're building on them. First, we share information with state and local, tribal and territorial partners so they understand the threat landscape and can be prepared to prevent a threat from materializing and actually becoming another tragic event. We also have grant funds that we distribute to different jurisdictions. Those are two very important ways. Throughout the government, I'm speaking of two efforts that the Department of Homeland Security has underway. Throughout the federal government, there are many other efforts underway. The Department of Education has digital literacy programs to make sure that our youth are not vulnerable to calls of violence, that understand how to identify streams that are trying to coax them into descending down a path of violence. So we have many different efforts underway across the federal government, and we partner with the Department of Education. We, of course, partner with the Department of Justice. We partner with the Department of Health and Human Services. I will say that we have to remind ourselves that the tragic events of Saturday in Buffalo, New York, do not reflect a new threat, a new challenge. This has been a threat and a challenge that has been increasing in gravity and frequency. And when I first took office in February of last year, I articulated quite clearly the threat that domestic violent extremism poses, and through our information bulletins and alerts, we have continued to communicate to the American public the threat that this poses. It is not only the threat of an ideology of hate, but it is the threat of that hate and its connectivity to violence. Thank you all.
Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for the late start. And if you will indulge me, we have a few items to get through at the top. Today, on International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Interphobia, and Transphobia, Ida Hobbit, we affirm that the promotion and protection of human rights of LGBTQI persons is a foreign policy priority. We emphasize that the human rights of LGBTQI plus persons are just that, human rights to which all persons are entitled, as made eminently clear in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which provides in its first article that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or sex characteristics, everyone deserves to live with respect, dignity, and safety. The United States commits to doing our part to promote and advance the human rights of LGBTQI plus persons globally and to end discrimination and violence against LGBTQI plus persons. We will capitalize on commitments made during President Biden's Summit for Democracy and the Year of Action to encourage positive reforms. Together with inclusive democracies, multilateral institutions, and civil society organizations around the world, we will continue to work toward a world where no one lives in fear because of who they are or whom they love. This week, we mark the occasion of Vesak Day, joining Buddhists around the world in celebration of a day honoring the life, legacy, and teachings of Buddha. This occasion also provides us with an opportunity to acknowledge the contributions of Buddhist communities around the world, communities that have helped to build a better world for people of all faith traditions. Let us all recommit ourselves to upholding the timeless values of tolerance, compassion, and respect that are imbued in the Buddhist faith. Happy Buddha Purnima. Next, the international community has witnessed horrific atrocities perpetrated by Russia's forces since President Putin launched his devastating and unjustifiable war of choice against Ukraine. We are working through partnerships with U.S. academia and the private sector to assist current and future quests for justice following months of fighting and mounting evidence of these widespread, large-scale atrocities that have been committed. To ensure that crimes committed by Russia's forces are documented and perpetrators are held accountable, today we have launched a new conflict observatory for Ukraine. The program will capture, analyze, and make publicly available open source information and evidence of atrocities, human rights abuses, and harm to civilian infrastructure, including Ukraine's cultural heritage. Forthcoming reports will be posted on the program's website, conflictobservatory.org. The information collected by the Conflict Observatory will be a resource for the world to see the deplorable and brutal actions of Russia's forces against the Ukrainian people. It will shine a light on atrocities and is intended to contribute to eventual prosecutions in Ukraine's domestic courts, courts in third-party countries, U.S. courts, and other relevant tribunals. It will provide information to refute Russia's disinformation campaigns and expand the range of our and our partners' accountability mechanisms. However long it takes, we are committed to seeing that justice is served. In Guatemala yesterday, President Giammattei chose to reappoint Maria Consuelo Porras, Argueta de Porras, as Attorney General despite her record of facilitating corruption. This is a step backward for Guatemalan democracy, transparency, and rule of law, a step that will hurt the people of Guatemala. During her tenure, Attorney General Porras has worked to dismantle Guatemala's justice sector, protect corrupt actors, and perpetuate impunity. She has a documented record of obstructing and undermining anti-corruption investigations in Guatemala to protect her allies and gain undue favor. Porras' pattern of obstruction includes reportedly ordering prosecutors in Guatemala's public ministry to ignore cases based on personal or political considerations and firing prosecutors who investigate cases involving acts of corruption. This corruption weakens the Guatemalan government's ability to reduce violence and stop narco-traffickers. It also slows down economic growth and scares away investments, robbing Guatemalans of jobs and opportunity, all of which are primary factors driving migration. Yesterday, as a result, we announced the public designation of the Attorney General under Section 7013C of the Department of State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Appropriation Act of 2022. This designation renders the Attorney General and her immediate family members ineligible for entry into the United States. We'll have more announcements about consequences for the bilateral relationship of this decision at the appropriate time, and will continue to robustly use our counter-corruption tools going forward. The United States is determined to stand with all Guatemalans in support of democracy and the rule of law and against those who would undermine these principles for personal gain. We call on the government of Guatemala to take serious, concrete steps to reverse democratic backsliding. And finally, on Monday, May 23rd, the United States will welcome the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, Secretary General His Excellency Hussein Brahim Taha, and the OIC delegation to Washington, D.C. for the inaugural U.S. OIC Strategic Dialogue. The United States and the OIC have been close partners for decades, and we share enduring economic, social, cultural, and person-to-person ties with the organization and its 57 members. The launching of this dialogue is an important affirmation of our growing ties. The dialogue will be led on our side by our Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs Assistant Secretary Yael Limpert and other senior department officials. On Wednesday, May 25th, Secretary Blinken will meet with the OIC Secretary General. We'll discuss shared challenges and opportunities in the fight against climate change, our support for greater respect for human rights the world over, mutual goals regarding women's empowerment and health issues, and our commitment to countering violent extremism. The strategic dialogue with the OIC is also part of our commitment to working closely with multilateral organizations, and it shows the depth and breadth of our shared interests. Through our sustained engagement, we'll further this important partnership and enable greater joint efforts to address shared challenges. So, having said all that, there may be time for a final question or two.
Thank you. Let me see, I got a couple very brief logistical ones, but they'll only be brief if you keep your answers brief.
Okay.
So let me make that appeal.
Okay.
Just one on this Ukraine observatory.
Yes.
I'm not quite, what exactly is new about, I mean, aren't you guys already doing this?
Well, it's a new mechanism, and essentially we are providing millions of dollars worth of funding to our partners on the outside.
Already providing millions of dollars of funding?
Well, yes, to partners to work with the Ukrainian Prosecutor General, but this is a new mechanism, and it's a new mechanism that will encompass the efforts of some of our key partners, including Yale, including ESRI, Planetscape AI, the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative.
And these institutions or groups weren't involved before?
You would have to ask them about their level of involvement before, but this is the first time we've launched a portal like this that will not only be a mechanism by which the department can work with these outside organizations to collect, to analyze, to document, but also importantly to share the findings that together we're able to uncover. And just as I said, they will be shared publicly on the website.
Well, I think you've said almost the exact same thing as it relates to the collection of war crimes evidence in the past. So anyway, it's fine that you have a new mechanism. I just want to know if there's I mean, fundamentally, you're still doing the same thing, right?
We have been engaged in the work through a variety of mechanisms and efforts to collect, to document, to analyze, to share evidence of potential atrocities, potential war crimes with relevant prosecutors, with relevant state entities, with relevant organizations. But this is the first time that these partners will have come together and to share those findings so that not only the public can see it, to shine a spotlight on what Russia's forces are doing in Ukraine, but so that relevant authorities in areas of appropriate jurisdiction, including within Ukraine, potentially including within the United States, so that prosecutors can potentially even build criminal cases based on the material that is published online.
On the Afghan embassy and consulates thing that I pointed out to you earlier?
We will get you updated information on that.
Do you know why, off the top of your head, the Afghan mission to the UN is not included?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The Afghan mission to the UN is not one of the facilities that is being, quote unquote, seized, taken control.
I don't have any more details to share, but if we do, we'll let you know.
On the Secretary's meeting tomorrow with the Turkish Foreign Minister, are you guys more, less, or the same concerned about what President Erdogan's position is on Finland and Sweden?
Well, you heard the Secretary speak to this over the weekend in Berlin. And the Secretary was in Berlin to meet with his counterparts in the context of a NATO ministerial. He had an opportunity to meet with Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu there, to speak with him. Other NATO members did as well. The Secretary, as you alluded to, Matt, will have an opportunity to see the Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, on the sidelines of the UN event tomorrow in New York City. What the Secretary said is that he, of course, and we, of course, won't characterize private conversations, but there was over the weekend, and there has been a strong consensus for bringing Finland and Sweden into the alliance if they so choose. The Secretary made the point that we are confident that we will be able to preserve that consensus should Finland, should Sweden formally apply for NATO membership. Of course, that has not yet happened. I know there's a perception that it may be a foregone conclusion, but precedent, protocol, procedure, all those P words are very important, especially in the world of diplomacy. So we'll reserve further comments until we hear additional.
Well, but there seem to be, at best, conflicting, if not absolutely contradictory positions coming from the President and then President Erdogan, and then apparently the people who the Secretary and NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg have been, and the other foreign ministers have been talking to, because Erdogan's comments yesterday were very clear in raising opposition. So are you still seeking clarification of the Turkish position?
It is not for us to speak for the Turkish government, of course. It is for us to speak as a member of the NATO alliance. And Secretary Blinken, who had the opportunity to sit in on the foreign ministerial discussions in Berlin over the weekend, came away with the same sense of confidence that there was strong consensus for admitting Finland and Sweden into the alliance if they so choose to join, and we're confident we'll be able to preserve that consensus. Daphne.
I mean, Erdogan said yesterday that Swedish and Finnish delegations should not bother coming to Ankara to convince it to approve their NATO bid? I mean, I just don't understand how you're reconciling that there's this consensus when Turkey's telling them not even to bother coming.
Again, it is not for me to speak for the Turkish government or to characterize their position. What we can do is characterize what we heard inside the NATO ministerial, what we have heard in bilateral and multilateral, including in conversations as an alliance with our fellow NATO allies. There is strong consensus, there has been strong consensus for admitting Finland and Sweden if they so choose to join. And again, as you heard from the Secretary, we are confident we'll be able to preserve that consensus.
Has Turkey asked for anything from the U.S. in exchange for supporting their bids?
Again, we're not going to read out private conversations. The Secretary did have a chance to see the Foreign Minister, Çavuşoğlu, in Berlin. He will have a chance to see him in New York City, and I'm certain these conversations will continue. Francesco.
Just to follow up on that, you keep referring to the confidence that emerged from the meeting over the weekend, and we're referring to what President Erdogan said yesterday. So is that confidence still there, and what explains your confidence as the President Erdogan said the contrary publicly?
I am explaining our confidence in the context of discussions that we have had bilaterally, multilaterally, and together as an alliance. Again, it is not for me to characterize the Turkish government's position. It is for us to characterize our position. You know where we stand. Should Finland and Sweden opt to apply for NATO membership, you have heard from a range of other NATO allies of their positions on this. Some have been quite explicit. I'm sure more will be if and when we hear that Finland and or Sweden are formally applying for the alliance. But all of the conversations we have had to date lend us that sense of confidence that we will be able to preserve that strong consensus for admitting Finland and Sweden if they so choose to apply.
And so today, after President Erdogan spoke yesterday, you are